Welcome to Lost River Legends. Our motto, Ex Tenebris, is Latin for out of the shadows. We attempt to understand the complex world around us and bring light to subjects hidden in darkness. We explore paranormal topics with guests from all around the world. Now welcome your Lost River Legends hosts, James and Brett. We hope you enjoy the show.
The definition of fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous to you, likely to cause pain, or is an immediate threat to you. Welcome to the latest episode of Lost River Legends. Thank you for being here. We have a great show planned for you. We'll be talking with Dr. Dallas Johnson about the science of fear. Now, when we reached out to Dr. Johnson, we really had a specific task in mind. We wanted to talk about people that experience, whether it's anything paranormal or not paranormal, anything that they approach in life that they feel that is fearful. There's a certain response physiologically, mentally, and emotionally. And we're going to be talking about what the human mind and what the human body goes through when someone experiences something fearful. So if you have something that's paranormal, if there's something that is not paranormal that you've experienced, this might help you understand exactly what you're going through and how to cope with those things. And we'd also like to say that we always strive to have the best production quality available to us for this podcast. It gives you a better experience and it's easier to listen to. And unfortunately, the recording for my voice on this interview didn't go as planned. You can still hear it, you can still understand it, it's just not up to quality that we'd like. So we apologize about that, and we'll try to fix that in future episodes. And if you already haven't done so, please consider subscribing to the show. It helps others find the show, and it helps our ratings and our reviews so this podcast can continue to grow and develop. And with that being said, this podcast and the website for Lost River Legends represents our own opinions and the opinions of Dr. Johnson. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. This content is for informational purposes only, so please consult a healthcare professional for medical guidance. And with that being said, here is the latest episode on the science of fear from Lost River Legends. Enjoy.
All right, Dr. Dallas Johnson, welcome to Lost River Legends. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's been a while. I know that we've had this conversation prepped and kind of queued for a while, and the stars finally aligned, and we have you on, and we can't thank you enough for your time, and especially being away from your family for a bit. But we wanted to have you on. I took one of your workshops. We work at the same place of business, and I took one of your workshops a couple of years ago about the fearless. You have to remind me what the name of it is, but it's really
fearless emotion management. Yeah,
fearless emotional management. Thank you, and it really intrigued me because just the psychology behind fear and how humans respond to that fear and how they have an understanding of what that is and the stimuli that's coming at them. And so can you explain what that workshop is?
So the workshop is there to help people both understand the underlying neurological and physiological processes of anxiety, depression, stress, trauma, to just get an understanding that there's really things happening inside the brain and body that make up depression and anxiety and trauma, those kind of things. So we talk about a little bit about what those are, what structures of the brain are being activated, utilized. And then we start talking about strategies to help people to manage their body and sometimes their mind when they're getting into elevated fear states that make it so they're not functioning as well as they would like to be.
Okay, perfect. And this is just kind of a full disclosure. We are kind of a paranormal type podcast, and this is definitely not a paranormal subject. But to kind of, with some of the things that we've researched and that we've studied, and some of the things that we've had on as guests topics, there's a lot of fear that people are having with some of these things, and maybe for instance we could have kind of a baseline. But say there's a hunter that's out in the woods, and he either hears or sees a bear, and there's a danger moment, a life-threatening moment. If you could just kind of walk us through what's happening to that hunter as he's processing that fear, and just the stimuli that's coming in, and the response, and everything that's going on in the mind and in the body when that fear state kicks in.
So you've got this hunter, and I'm assuming he's hunting deer or something like that. Mm-hmm. And as he's hunting, he's already deliberately heightening his senses. He's probably trying to visually scan his environment. He's listening more closely than usual. So already his body has him likely in a more activated state, which is helpful. He wants this to happen. And in a sense, he's activating some of the fear centers, but it's a pleasurable way of doing it, because it's called the ventral vagal nerve is activated. He's engaged in this process. It's pleasant. So as he's doing this, suddenly he sees something that's not what he's after. It's a bear. And depending on what he knows about bears, if this was a little kid, they would have zero response. But because this is an adult and probably understands bears and understands that they can be quite dangerous if not managed well in the wild, we can imagine almost immediately, and this process will take place in about 300ths of a second, so about a blink of an eye. As he sees this bear, this image triggers a response in his amygdala, the limbic system. When that happens, his limbic system says, okay, it is time to deal with this threat. And so it stimulates different parts of the brain to release cortisol, a stress hormone. It sends signals down through the body. People heard the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system.
Sure.
So it stimulates that. The heart rate is going faster. The lungs are starting to deliberately try and pull in more oxygen because there's a threat here. And it's time to either beat up this threat or run away from it. So this hunter now is super activated. His eyes, his pupils are actually getting larger, right, to let more light in. And as this happens, he's taking in more of his environment. But then also mentally, the thing that is dangerous becomes bigger. Like, just phenomenologically is what they call that. But the perception of the threat literally gets bigger, and that's helpful because more light is coming in, more stimulus is coming in. So this bear, maybe it's just a little yearling and it's not that big, but until this hunter realizes it, it could feel like the biggest grizzly bear that's ever been out there if he's feeling threatened.
Right.
And so this is where we get the exaggerated stories. If I saw this, oh, wow, it had to be this 2,000-pound bear coming at me, and the ranger's like, we don't have any of those around here. But so this process starts happening, and it's not that the person is lying. They really, phenomenologically, they experienced a very massive bear. And that's to help their system deal with it, to see things with more acuity, with more light coming in. And so it does feel and is perceived as bigger. Now this person is supposed to either run away from this bear. That's what the cortisol, and the liver's pumping out glucose to really get the body and the muscles ready with the extra energy to run away or to deal with the threat. And this is really nice. It takes place, like I said, within 300ths of a second, this process is going. Hopefully this hunter then is able to utilize that energy to deal with the threat. And then a few minutes later, when the threat's gone, his body starts to go back to its more regulated state, although he's probably going to find that he's shaky because there's still excess glucose and cortisol in his body. And he'll feel quite, what some people would say, nervous for some time after, as his body begins to get back to a regular state.
Now, is that the same as what I'm thinking, like the fight or flight response? Is that what this process is? Okay.
That's exactly it. Yes.
So you got all the stimuli, you said the pupils are dilated, the sensory inputs in the human body are just kind of dialed up quite a bit because getting ready for a flight or a fight.
Yeah.
Now there's some people I hear that are in a fearful state, and I don't know if it's a response to the same thing, but some people are like, I'm just so exhausted afterwards.
Yes.
Is that because everything's just kind of normalizing and your body is just was in a hyperactive state and things are just stabilizing?
Yeah, exactly. Because it goes into this kind of superhuman state, which consumes enormous amounts of the body's fuel and energy, the adrenaline, the cortisol, those kind of things. They really cause the body to get tense, really intense, ready to do things the person physically wouldn't normally be able to do, but because the body's pumping up so many hormones, afterwards the body needs rest, and so it's exhausted. Someone would just run a 5K. We wouldn't be surprised that if they just ran a 5K really fast, they're going to be exhausted and tired and want to take a rest, especially if they're not used to that. And this hunter is going to do essentially that, at least as far as the hormones and the glucose, but all within a few minutes. His body's going to just really hyper consume resources, and he's going to be exhausted afterwards.
So this response that we just talked about with this subject, this hunter, is that going to be, for the most part, are most people going to respond the same way? I mean, male, female, age, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's some level of response that's going to be the same through all those.
Some level. Everybody's the part that's really important here is the amygdala, and there literally can be size differences in different people. So some people are going to perceive threat at a much higher level than others. And it's not even male or female. It's just kind of that size of the amygdala. Also, exposure historically to past threats or trauma can actually literally increase the size of that amygdala. So it's more likely to take over when threat is present.
Okay. So, and that would be referred to as like a PTSD.
Yes.
Okay. So anything
has PTSD.
Okay. And we see that with like war vets and different things. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about with PTSD, but war vets immediately kind of comes to mind with how that's treated and how it's impacted people. Unfortunately. So, what part of the brain is driving, like normalizing everything out after a fear state takes place?
So hopefully once that amygdala and the lower brainstem regions, the autonomic nervous system, start to calm down because the threat is no longer perceived as present, the frontal lobes, this is the person, right? The conscious person starts to be able to reanalyze what just happened and to try and make sense of it. And it's likely that it's not like a movie. Their brain didn't record this beautiful, second by second of this experience. It's going to be really choppy because there's so much cortisol in that it's almost like the brain is taking snapshots here and there. And then the person's brain is going to try and put that together into a coherent story. And in the case of PTSD, that process can take years for them to still try and make sense of this stuff that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And for other people, within a few minutes, especially if it wasn't too big of a threat, they're going to be able to put that story together and be able to retell their fun experience seeing a bear later that evening just fine.
Yeah, and we have some people that, whether it's a hunter or someone that's a war vet or anyone and anything in between, that if they encounter something fearful, then, some hunters will quit hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, kind of a protection to their psyche.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. They become hypersensitized to the threat. So it really becomes, even if they start approaching it. So when that hunter is seeing this bear and the brain's perceiving it as a massive threat, in that moment, the brain is also making associations with what is dangerous, what might hurt us. So it's also really acutely listening to the sounds in the air, the smells in the air, the sense of touch with different things. So all this, even what the person is thinking, all of this is being associated with threat. And most of the time, after this threat is over, the brain is like, okay, well, that smell didn't indicate danger, or that, bushes didn't indicate danger. It was really just the bear. And the brain is able to do that. But about 20% of the time, when we're talking trauma, about 20% of the time, the brain just keeps building. It just keeps trying to find all the ways that the person could have died. And this is non-conscious. It's not the person trying to consciously figure out how to be safe from bears. It's this non-conscious part of the brain saying, you know what? Like, there was that smell. We could smell the sagebrush or the oak and those rustling bushes over there. I could hear some birds. And now when this person goes back in that environment, any one of those can actually trigger the fear response. And so this person gets really uncomfortable, like not just uncomfortable, but painfully uncomfortable, and starts having what we call a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And it's their brain saying, don't go there because we'll be hurt. And so now this person has been overly sensitized to threat, and they're more prone to likely respond in a more extreme fight or flight in the future if they don't directly address it.
And, I'm glad you brought that up. And, I've been in I think everyone has been in a scary situation, a fearful state where your senses are kind of dialed to an 11 and all the inputs just kind of being overloaded. One question I had is, if, your eyes are dilated, your hearing, all your senses, everything's really just maxed out. Is your memory also of that event, is that also being more detailed, more recorded more in detail because of that?
Does that make sense? Yes, it does. And this is what we call the phenomenological effect here, is the memory changes a little bit because it's going to go, we've got this intense emotion, intense other things going on. It's going through the hippocampus, but it's going to be recorded both in the hippocampus, but also in emotional memory storage and in the body. It happens really fast, but it's not like normal memory. It's that brain is focused on the biggest, most important parts of the threats, and all the details are completely missing. All the stuff surrounding it, the context, the brain didn't focus on that. And what's remembered is those important details. So like a police officer who's, in a gun standoff, they actually will report seeing that the person had, a massive assault rifle when it turned out to just be a little toy gun. And that's the phenomenological effect, because the brain is hyper-focused on the threat, making it bigger, not consciously, just trying to get that police officer, hey, there's a big threat here. Let's be attentive to it so we can deal with it. But then the police officer thinks it was a much bigger gun than it actually was.
That's interesting because my dad's father, when I was a young man, I was just a young kid. I mean, he passed away about 18 years ago, 17 years ago, and he smoked. I don't smoke, but he smoked, and there was this particular brand of cigarette that he liked to smoke. And every time I smelled it, I thought of him.
Yeah.
And even afterwards, after his passing, you go to the state fair or you go somewhere and I smell that cigarette, and instantly I think of my grandpa, and it's actually a good memory response because of what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the same thing as kind of what you're talking about, just opposite.
Opposite. Smell, the olfactory bulb is the only of the five senses that sits immediately adjacent to that part of your brain, the threat response. So actually, what you experience through smell, it can stimulate those positive or negative memories faster than any of the other senses can. And so this hunter, a certain smell that happened to be there when that bear was there will actually trigger a fear response. And the hunter may not even know, why am I all of a sudden really, really anxious?
Yeah, he's not even in the forest, and he could be having a response.
But that smell came up. Like your grandpa's not even present, but that smell brought all these memories back of your grandpa. It's actually the very same process. And yeah, that olfactory bulb is right there next to the amygdala. So there's actually nothing faster to stimulate a sense of peace or a sense of fear than smell.
That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. So as far as what these people are experiencing as far as a fear response, what are some of the first steps that they should be taking in regards to understanding what they went through and coping with what they went through, and kind of the first steps in addressing that trauma?
Mm-hmm. And actually, about 4 out of 5 times, this is a natural process. It's best to leave people like me out of it. We've learned that the hard way. It's good for people like me to just stay away the first little while. The body needs to adjust to this itself. It needs to not sleep for a few days. If it's a big trauma, it needs to just kind of start to process on its own, not with some psychologist coming in and trying to make sense of things. About 4 out of 5 times, the brain and body take care of that all on its own. For those people who that's not happening, and we usually wouldn't even begin to look at this until a month after. This is that first month of having weird sensations, sleeplessness, anxiety, panic at random times. That's very normal. So if we wouldn't tell anybody to do anything different, just keep going about your day, things will resolve. But after about a month, if someone is not only still having those reactions, like the smell reactions out of nowhere, or they hear something and they're just hypersensitive, they're really jumpy, their brain is actually going the other direction. It's trying to, in an effort to make sure this person is never traumatized again, it's hypersensitizing them at the non-conscious level to any possible threat. So this trauma never happens again. Of course, most of the time it's not true. It's not going to happen again. And this is where we go in, and now consciously, maybe this is what you were asking. So now we're going to go in very consciously and start helping the person recognize what's happening. So begin to realize, oh, well, my body's doing this thing. It's going into that anxiety, stress state or a shutdown state. And I'm safe. So they need to first recognize that the response is happening, recognize consciously that, okay, I'm actually safe right now. They need to start consciously making, okay, even though I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling scared, I'm actually in no danger right now. So that's really important to get that foundation down. And then it's usually helpful to start having some sort of coping strategy to calm their body down. So breathing strategies are used a lot with first responders, like deliberate breathing patterns really quickly can calm the body down. Muscle relaxation exercises, grounding, just anything that really helps the person feel like they're on solid earth is very calming to the body. And the more consciousness I can put on the fact that I'm on a solid surface, the more my brain kind of says, oh, I guess we're safe. And it starts reversing that fear response. So we teach people these coping skills. And then as that happens, we can then also go from the more cognitive side of things and start, as their bodies calm, start realizing, you know what? Actually, not only am I safe, but now I can begin to reframe and better understand that experience I had to design my safety consciously rather than letting my body take control of it. So if I'm a soldier coming back from war and I was on convoys and I was always looking for roadside bombs, when I come back to the States, well, that box on the side of the road does not mean there's a bomb, but my body's going to respond like it's a bomb. And so I have to start deliberately recognizing it's a box and kind of reassociating that box on the side of the road as just random garbage. It's not a threat to my life. Am I making sense? Am I going Is this all right?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And, I think, anyone that's listening, whatever is happening in your life, um, I, I think everyone has a story to tell about something that they fear or a moment that has traumatized them, and how to deal with it. And I think that's very valuable. I think, James, you had a question, right?
Yeah, it's probably not as relevant to where we're at in the conversation right now, but I was thinking about that whole adrenaline dump situation and the perception of time, because you talked about how things are kind of more frame stitched together, but some people talk about like how time feels like it slows down and that things are in slow motion,
Right.
and that I'm guessing that that's just, again, that sense opening up and receiving more information and trying to process that. Is that correct?
That's exactly it. So as the eyes dilate, more information is actually coming through the optical nerve, the audio cortex in the brain. It's actually processing more information. The body sensations are being, so the whole brain is being flooded with this intense amount of, and so it feels like time is slowed down because I'm actually processing way more than I normally process. And that makes it feel like time has slowed down. Obviously it didn't, but it sure feels that way. And this second lasts a very long time. I get, at least from my perception.
So we're not actually like in the Matrix and slowing down bullets with.
Yeah, we're not slowing down as the bullets pass us, but it can literally feel that way just because our brain is it's on this hyper mode. It's processing information way faster than it normally does. It's really efficient in that moment. And so we feel like the Matrix. We feel like it really, I can move, I can see things much more clearly, even though, it's just more information flooding the brain.
I hear people reporting that when they're in an automobile accident of some kind where everything's just really slow. And even in movies, everything slows down during a car wreck. So you can be pulled in and feel that.
Yeah.
So as far as some of these skills that people are learning, and everyone's going to be, depending on the situation, whatever the trauma is, whatever the fear response that they might have had. If you're talking about with most people, just give it a few days and the body and the mind will just kind of normalize and cope and deal with things and get back to a normal state. But for those that don't, there could be a longer road ahead for them, whether it's dealing with some PTSD and the anxiety and all those skills, with the breathing and being grounded and all those things that you had talked about. Is there anything else that people are counseled to do to assist with this?
A lot of it's going to be very individual to the person and to the threat. So if the person now consciously is also believing there's a threat everywhere, I don't dare walk into a forest now. Not only from a non-conscious level is my body responding, now consciously I start like creating those threats that when is this going to happen again? And that can become very problematic because then the person, their life gets really small because now they get afraid of doing more and more things. So what we want to do is, again, once a person is recognizing they're having a fear response, they know they're safe, they're conscious about this, calming their body, then beginning to really reprocess what happened. And that can be helpful to use another person in that process. Sometimes this is such a heightened state that we'll invite people to consider taking a medication that will actually help the brain not get so activated and kind of hijack them nearly constantly. And medication can go in and actually slow that process. Usually the medication is actually what it's really doing is it's hitting the frontal lobes and increasing serotonin as one example, so that they can actually process more efficiently. And the frontal lobes are where our conscious self is located. So we may encourage people to even take medication. It doesn't have to be permanent, but just to help their brain and body get back to a state where they can start deliberately regulating themselves. There's lots of different interventions cognitively that they can begin to do to reframe and change the way they perceived that event.
So, I wanted to ask about, so it's really interesting to look at how the body is wired, because there's all these different organs coming together and firing kind of in a sequence. And that comes from somewhere. That comes from, we believe it comes from how we're created. But there's a question I have about how much of it is ingrained. Is there anything that's kind of ingrained, or is there any evidence to suggest that comes from a genetic side? So is there kind of a quote unquote genetic memory of something in the past, or is that passed on generationally?
Yeah, there's some fascinating research now about, it's called epigenetics. So epigenetics are protein markers on top of genes that they can get moved around quite a bit. They're not the genes themselves, they're the protein markers that decide what genes might get activated. And what they're finding, what's really interesting, is because of these protein markers on the genes, I can literally inherit my parents' and grandparents' stress. Because when they were stressed, or when they were an alcoholic, or when they had a traumatic experience, they're on top of their genes, and I guess for a male it'd be on the sperm. On top of that, it actually encoded some of that stress on that cell and on that DNA, and that stays with the person, and then it gets passed on to the next generations. And this is why there's differences coming right from the beginning. We don't all come out at the same level of sensitivity to threat. For example, if we have a history of family who has depression or anxiety, even if I don't have depression and anxiety myself, I'm going to be more sensitive to threat than the average person because of that. And I don't know if this fully answers what you were asking, but yes, we can absolutely, at least from our parents and others. And so there's no reason, I guess, from a creator standpoint, that also couldn't be encoded, those protein markers on the genes itself, specific to maybe my own past experiences. If I believe I lived previously, then those would also be encoded. I don't know how that process would work. I have research on that, but it would make logical sense that would also be encoded into my genes. So I have that physical experience of past experiences.
So I kind of look at DNA as a little bit of a read-write storage media, so to speak, because I'm a computer guy, I'm a web developer.
Right.
So thinking about that, do we know yet if there is a way to adapt those protein markers through whether therapies or nutrition or other factors that we can kind of edit our epigenetics?
Absolutely. And you nailed it. We actually can. I can deliberately, unfortunately, I can't do, I've already had my kids, so they got whatever stress I had there, so too bad for them. But yes, I can actually change those protein markers. And as those change, my stress and anxiety overall is going to go down too, because all the cells in my body aren't encoding and contributing to that stress. Yes, diet can be very influential on how quickly and efficiently protein markers are able to switch out, and also further exposure. So I'm not just changing my brain and my gross physiology. We literally begin to change at the cellular level and the genetic level when we engage in deliberate mental health type learning and calming.
That's fascinating to me. I think that there's probably some future implications for that, and for having stresses lifted from an external force, if you know what I mean. So that's
yes,
that's kind of cool to think. And they've actually found that they can store information in DNA and sequence that, and that light is something that has something to do with that. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in there.
Yeah, definitely beyond my doctorate there. So different field, but absolutely, it does make more and more sense. Where previously people thought, there's no God, there can't be a creator. It becomes increasingly obvious that, wow, that the body's far more complex than we realized. There's no reason at all to believe that we're the first creatures or humans to exist. It could have been very, very well planned out that a prior intelligent being set up a new colony or established another race because they wanted to propagate that. And in our sense, from a spiritual sense, I guess they would say that that's God, and he provided a path for us to have a physical body like he has. That might have nothing to do with this podcast, but I know you can edit all that out if that's not helpful. But
all good.
No, we like to hear it. Yeah, it's all good. So with the genetic memory, quote unquote, that which you guys just talked about, we can have both good and bad memory associated with that. Is that correct?
Right. Exactly. And again, from the spiritual side, because it seems like the scriptures always get there first, we would hear the things that the sins of the parents are visited upon the heads of the children for the third and fourth generation. And that seemed weird until epigenetics came along and we realized, oh, what my great-grandparents did actually literally affects me today. And it's just a great way. And that can work in both directions. So I'm not just talking about sins. I'm just talking about my great-grandparents' behavior literally influenced how I can perceive and interacted with the world.
Right. Yeah, fascinating that my mind's going in all sorts of different directions right now. James always has those deep questions, and I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. That's really interesting. Hopefully my mind can process that. Yeah, that's fascinating. It really is.
So I wanted to ask about, so we have these fear responses, but we also have kind of external forces sometimes that like to take advantage of fear. I like to think about maybe countries that have a dictator, or countries that have people kind of coerced into a certain level of servitude. I'd like to kind of get into some of that psychology and how fear can be hijacked to make people do stuff that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I'm not even talking about current political climate or anything right now. I'm more talking about kind of in a general sense.
Right. So that would, when we get into social psychology, they look at that a lot. Like, how is it that, you can have this person that can utilize fear so efficiently? And it really is. And actually it's utilized even in commercials, right? You think about the commercials you watch, and some blasted psychologist was there, helping them create this sense of threat, and that whatever it is that they're selling will cure that threat. And so a lot of that is happening. So on a bigger scale, like a dictator, they're doing this at a much larger level, but they're saying, I'm the answer to that awful feeling you're having right now. I'm the answer to that. Or this product that I have, that awful feeling you just had, ironically, because I just stimulated it, I have the answer to you not having to feel that anxiety anymore, or that discomfort, or that loneliness, even though I deliberately just stimulated that in you in what I did previously. The person's not thinking of that consciously. They just know that, wow, I need that product because I need to feel safe again. Yeah. Did that help, James, or did I miss the question?
It's pretty, it's pretty diabolical to think about that on on kind of even on a marketing level, but in some countries it is illegal to actually market drug products. And I could see,
Yeah.
I could see why, I think about
Yeah.
it more along the line of like I don't know if you've heard of Hegelian dialectic, where there's basically a stimulus or like a problem that induces fear. And then there's, that reaction, but the same people that induce the fear provide a solution to that. So it's kind of the same thing in a micro
Yeah.
with a commercial. Like I just pointed out a
Mm-hmm.
problem and now you feel this way. And now here's a solution right here in a 30-second, 1 minute commercial.
Yep. Yeah. It's very powerful. And once we trigger a person's emotions, we're taking their conscious self offline, right? If we can get people into a fear state, their frontal lobes literally, because the body's trying to conserve energy when it's in a fear state. So it's letting go of unneeded resources. Like you don't need to be processing the food in your gut. You don't need to be thinking philosophically. So those parts of the brain and the body start going offline. I'm now very responsive to my emotions. So in that moment, I'm very, people can influence me pretty easy. I'm very impressionable in that moment because I just need safety again.
So that kind of,
and we see that a lot with, I'm sorry, James. Sorry. We see that a lot with like social media, right? I mean, everyone has their phones and their devices to access information all the time. And we see these social media influencers. I mean, we're kind of getting off into the weeds just a little bit, but I mean, the psychology is there that there's influence that's happening, whether you want to associate with a certain group, whether it be political, religious, social, economic, and, there's this safety mechanism when you associate with these different groups. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. That's to get into the echo chambers. And I'm going to tell you why you should be afraid of that other group. And then I'm going to talk about how we can solve this. And it just becomes this cycle. So I might go one direction or another politically. It's irrelevant, really, at an emotional level. It's just that this group promises safety from that other group, and it can get really, really intense. And it's emotional. It's not. We've been hijacked at that point. We're no longer rational beings. We're emotional beings, pretending to be rational. I'm getting a thing that says this call will end in 10 minutes. Do I need to do anything about that?
No, I was just going to say we're kind of wrapping up on time a little bit. With Google Meet and Zoom, we have a limited amount of space / time. So I think we'll be wrapping up here pretty soon. James, I think you had a question before I jumped in with that social question.
Yeah, I mean, my brain's going 1,000 miles an hour here just with questions, but that state that that susceptible state that you talked about, with television, they call it the beta brainwave that they've observed, kind of those different sections of the brain shutting down and some becoming more enhanced. Something that's kind of actually almost, when I've become acutely aware of, say, going to a movie in a movie theater and it's a very enthralling experience and it's eliciting emotion, like I find that almost invasive. Like you're in the experience and it's like, it's great. But then to step back and go, holy cow, like they just tapped into so many things. That's kind of crazy.
And on top of all of that, the theater deliberately pumped in the smell of popcorn so that now I need some popcorn. So, emotional. But yes, during those movies, they deliberately do that, right? They're trying to hijack all of our senses. And we want them to. We're in a safe environment. We want them to hijack us because we want a fantasy for a minute. And that's fine. And right after the movie, we're going to walk outside. It might be the middle of the day. And my brain is going to quickly associate, I'm safe. That was just a movie. And that's good. Although some people walk out of those movies and have nightmares because their brain doesn't switch and realize, oh, well, what if the ghosts are going to come get me now? And now we're off to the races for some nightmares and problems just from a movie that wasn't even real.
Yeah, that's just crazy. That level of, I guess, dialing things in, the music score, the character, the dialogue, everything just kind of playing in. It's interesting to see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a similar response when you're on a roller coaster. You're fearful, you're scared, you're screaming,
Mm-hmm.
some people might be laughing and having a good time, and you get off and, oh, I'm fine. I can walk around. I'm safe. I'm still alive. And there's that adrenaline that's associated with that too.
Yes. And those people that are probably laughing and smiling, they've ridden this roller coaster 100 times. Their brain has pretty much let go of the threat. It's kind of exposure therapy in a way. They've just ridden it so much, nothing bad happened, even though everything indicated that I should die here. Nothing bad happened, so the brain lets go. It's kind of a waste of time. Let's not worry about it. So the person now is free to actually have a really pleasant experience having their body go through these sensations.
Yeah. Really quick, I know we're kind of closing in on the end of our discussion here, but there's that rock climber, Alex Hanold. He's a free climber, meaning he climbs without safety equipment, harnesses, ropes, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a great documentary on it, and it's absolutely crazy to see him do what he does in this documentary. But one of the things that they did in the documentary, is I think they did some kind of MRI or CT scan on his brain, and they said whatever fear response that you should be having when you're up there, thousands of feet in the air, hanging off this wall by your thumb, you don't, it's not working properly in your mind. And he's so calm and collected when he's up on there. He just says, I'm not afraid of falling. And he says, I'm in full control. And he just has this really interesting response. I just thought that was interesting. That's a kind of a whole other thing itself, but
yeah, that's where we get some of the good information we know about how the brain works, is when we have those anomalies like him, or however he's done that, whether it was genetic, whether it was his brain type was different from the get-go, or if because of ongoing exposure, the way he uses his imagination while he's on the rock, because most people, when they're, is that solo climbing, free solo climbing,
yeah,
most people keep having images of themselves splattered on the ground, scares
exactly.
the tar out of the brain,
right.
And that part of the brain really can't tell the difference between reality and what I'm imagining. So I have a fear response, and maybe he's just so good at how he uses his imagination while he's on the rock that it doesn't go there. It only goes to confidence, placement of his next foot or handhold.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Well, Dallas, we can't thank you enough. This has been a great discussion. Both James and I think we're filled. I think we still have a lot of questions, but in our minds are probably going to different places that we haven't been before, and we can't thank you enough for being on the show. This has been a lot of fun, and we just can't thank you enough.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you. I enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lost River Legends. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to help support the podcast, please share it with others and consider subscribing. Here at Lost River Legends, our primary focus is delivering unique topics, amazing guests, all paired with top-notch production value. The Earth we live on has many hidden secrets, countless paranormal stories, and is filled with amazing, curious humans who are trying to find answers to life's questions. Here at Lost River Legends, we are no different. We believe an active curiosity to the unknown is ingrained in the human experience. We hope you will join us on our journey to explore the lost legends of the Earth by listening to past and future episodes. Until then, James and I wish you health, happiness, and a curious mind. And remember, the clock of life is ticking away. Don't waste another moment and live your best life.